Okay, so where do you actually start in a brand new project? I'm actually not sure on where the best part is to start on while working on a new project, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work on my schema. So what's a schema? So I would describe a schema as the way that you're representing your data on the backend and by extension in your database. So to give an example, I probably want to have a schema wherein you have a model of a routine, and each routine is going to have a unique ID as well as a title for what this routine is called. It's also going to need a starting time and an ending time, and it's also going to need to have any associated habits with that specific routine. So that's what's gonna define a part of my schema at least. So the first thing that I'm gonna work on is to create a part of my schema for writing and reading from the database, and the part of the schema that I'm gonna be working on is gonna be focused on routines as well as habits. So this is gonna be the starting point for our schema. We have set up a model called routine, which is gonna have a title, an ID, a start time, an end time, and a habits array. And this habits array is gonna store habits, and each habit is gonna have a title, an array of which day those habits are active, as well as having reference to this routine table. So this creates a one-to-many relation. And this enum is just so we're restricting the kind of strings that you can have in your active days. So you can't, for instance, put in banana or something. You're only going to be able to have active days in the database. Okay, so I've written a part of my database schema. So what I want to do now is to start working on the actual API layer. So when you're creating a GraphQL API, you have to create first a separate schema, and this schema is what you're going to be exposing and what are the actual fields from, say, your database schema, which are going to be able to be queried. So this is an example of a GraphQL schema. What's interesting here is that we don't have to have a one-to-one mapping. So for instance, say that in your database you're going to want to store a user, and the user is going to have, say, an ID, a name, an email, and say they're going to have a password as well. But in our GraphQL API, you don't need to expose the password, and you really shouldn't expose the password. But that's also kind of what separates them, that this schema, which correlates to the database, stores everything that's going to be stored in the database, and the schema for the GraphQL is going to decide on what are the things that can be queried. And you're also going to have to create resolvers, and resolvers are, you can think of it as functions that are called from your, when your request is being sent, is going to go to a resolver, and that resolver is going to decide on how that request is being handled. So say that I want my users to query a routine, then they're going to send a request to the GraphQL API, and that request is going to send it to a resolver, and that resolver is going to figure out, okay, say that we want to fetch it for the database, or maybe we don't because the user isn't logged in or they don't have authority to check it. Then that part is going to be handled by the resolver. So at this point, I've created a simple GraphQL schema, which corresponds to the database schema. And now I want to start working on my resolvers, on how to figure things out. And we can see here that in the mutation, we're going to pass a routine input, which is going to take a title, a start time, and end time. But at the moment, we don't have a way for knowing what kind of input it's going to take. As you can see, it's going to say implicit because it doesn't know yet. So what we can do to solve that is we can actually install GraphQL code generator and make it generate TypeScript file for us now. So that's what I'm gonna do. So I should probably clarify that when you write GraphQL resolvers, they can either be of type query, which for REST API, the corresponding operation will be a get, or you can have a mutation. And the mutation is when you want to pass data to and you want to write something, and the corresponding REST API, REST operation would be patch, put, post, or delete. But you don't have those operations in GraphQL. You have either you have a query or you have a mutation. You can also have subscribers, but we're not going to go into that. Okay, so I've added GraphQL code generator now, and I've created this YAML file. And what we're telling this code gen in this YAML file is to look for our schema that's found here on our API GraphQL endpoint. And we can inspect the schema which is going to use, which is going to be the same schema that we have defined and I've showed previous. And we can inspect it here. And it's also going to search the documents folder. And so we have to have some form of query, and I'm just going to have the basic hello query because otherwise it can get a little, it can complain a bit and throw errors. So we're just going to have a simple operations for now. And now when we run yarn generate, we should get a folder. Yeah, so here's the folder with our generated GraphQL. And this is going to have all the types. So we can see that we have an enum, a TypeScript file now, and we have a habit and a mutation and everything that's relevant. And this is what we can use to create, to have type safety, to basically generate type safety all across the stack without having to write all these interfaces for ourselves, which is a huge benefit. Okay, so I've created a super simple resolver to resolve this mutation called create routine. And now we can use this routine input, which we generated with when we used GraphQL CodeGen, as the argument for this function, because in our schema we have declared that we take a variable called routine input of type routine input. And because we have generated a type, we can infer that, and we know that now. So now we have access to all these variables, and we know that the types are for sure what we're telling them to be. And that also means that now we can call our Prisma, our ORM, to write into the database, and what we're telling it is to create a routine and pass this data which is being sent from the mutation. And then if the routine is successfully created, then we can log it and then we can return it. Otherwise, we're just gonna return null. So if we want to try it, we can just go in here in our playground, and we can just do something like this. We can go title, start time, and end time. And if we run it now, we can see, okay, so it has, it's given us a response. And we should see here that we have successfully created routine. And we can also look in their database. And when you use Prisma, they have something called Prisma Studio. And you can watch your database. So if we run it, we can see that now in our database, we have two entries, one from earlier and one which I created now. And we have successfully created an entry in our database with using our GraphQL mutation. So I think this is a good ending point for the video. We have started working on our database schema and declared two models, one for our habits and one for our routines. We've also started working on our GraphQL API and started working on what to expose. We have created a single resolver for a mutation in our GraphQL schema, which writes to the database successfully. And we've also added GraphQL code generator to generate TypeScript files for us. So I think that's fine for now, and thanks for watching and stay tuned.